Good morning, everyone, and happy Thursday. My name is Sierra Franklin, and I am here with Franklin and Franklin Consulting Group. I am an organizational development consultant, and as you know, we've been working very closely over the last couple of months. And today is the day that we will talk through our executive action plan. So super excited for you all to be here. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and grab yourself a snack, a bottle of water. I know many of you have just returned from a bio break. So super glad that you're with us today. If you haven't gone ahead and done those things, make sure that you do those so we can settle in. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to Talk Through It Thursday, right? We're doing a little bit of a spin on a lunch and learn, right? We're gonna call it maybe a breakfast and learn. Typically, it's called a lunch, learn, and launch session. But today, because we couldn't meet for a lunch session today because you guys had a scheduling conflict, we'll do a breakfast session, right? So what is our day going to look like? We're going to talk about our executive action plan, and then I will leave space for us to have a discussion, right? Because this is not just me presenting you with data and information. This is the time and place for us to have a discussion and a debrief and talk through action steps. So I also want to preface with this as well, right? So this presentation is basically a screenshot or just a mini view of all of the detailed comprehensive information that has been laid out for you in the executive action plan document. And then also you have a dry bones document, which is what we call our executive summary, right? And it goes into not as much into the weeds, but it gives you just a generic overview. So please feel free to at any point in time. That's why you have your supplemental materials to reference those for more details. And this is just to kind of walk you through and give you a bit of insight without overwhelming you. And then we'll do a post-secondary session where we'll come back, and then after you've read things in details, then we can have a more in-depth dialogue and keep the conversation going. So I did want to preface with that. So thank you for your time. So let's talk about Macro Enterprises. Let's talk about what you guys do. Let's look at things that you do well, areas for improvement. So let's dive in, right? So as I was sitting down and I was looking at the extensive documentation that you all have provided me with, I decided to lay out your vision, your mission, and your goals, right? So I think it's super important when you're working with organizations, and this is something that I always say, you have to lay the foundation. If the foundation is not set properly, the entire home cannot stand. So all of our strategic planning that we will do will always come back right to the foundation of the house, and that would be your goals, your mission, your vision. Right? So, for example, your vision, when I think of Macro Enterprises, my vision for you all in my head, I think that you guys are a mighty leader of the boating industry, focused in on innovative, reliable, quality services and products, right? And your mission. This is something that's so powerful that sets you apart. You guys should want to power and jumpstart the fun in the marine and boating industry, right? The carburetors, they power the boats, right? So you guys are powering and jumpstarting the fun. And that's the story that you want to tell. That's the story that you want to sell. That is Macro Enterprises' story. You guys are mighty but small with a $10 million um, profit baseline, right? When we think through that. So there's a lot of great work being done here, right? And it seems that your vision, after talking with the CEO and talking with Pat several times, you want to provide your clientele with high quality marine carburetors that positively impact the boating and marine industry. And that's something that we're going to talk about today. how do we find that happy medium, so to speak, when we're thinking through building out these high quality marine carburetors, right? And we don't want it to just be, oh, we had 5 days of building out high quality marine carburetors with little defects, right? We want this to be a cycle where we've done this for 5 years, we've done this for 50 years, we're doing it for 500 years, right? Because you want to have sustainability and you want to for macro enterprises to continue on to the next generation, right? So that's what I think about when I look at your organization, right? And I think ultimately your goal is to strengthen the employees that you have on staff, invest in them with professional development of all sorts, and then to build a more cohesive and coherent organizational culture. So let's continue. So, what is the strategic focus of macro enterprises? I always say I like to think of a big three, right? And sometimes it's super easy to get lost in the sauce and start thinking of all these different things when you're trying to have a strategic focus. But I think after having several conversations with you all, it seems that everything keeps coming back to the three big C's, right? And when I say I think of your collective as an organization, so I think of your line manufacturers, I think of your line employees, I think of your line managers. Um, your community is super super important, right? Without the people in your organization, without that collective, you would not be able to empower the boat and marine industry, right? So people matter, right? Your clientele matters. Are the people that keep macro enterprises in business, right? So thinking through that as well, your clientele is super super important. We want to make sure that we're leaving a long lasting positive impression on our clientele because they're the gift that keeps on giving. And then community, right? You also have a big big thought towards community, right? Because we know that macro enterprises, you guys are very focused on CSR, corporate social responsibility. So it makes sense that you're community focused and community driven, and you do care about sustainability and how your organization can impact climate change, or and what you can do to positively impact climate change by reducing your carbon footprint. So those are the areas that I think when we're talking and having these conversations, all roads should lead back to the big three. And that is one way that we keep things succinct, we keep them simple, but yet we make a powerful and a mighty punch when we think in ways like this. So all roads will lead back to our collective, our clientele, and the community in which we serve. So let's talk organizational measures. I've done an extensive deep dive through documents that you've given me. We've talked about your standard operating procedures. We've talked in depth about so many things. So let's talk about our findings, right? And I always preface with this. You can have a good company, but if you don't do anything to grow your company will never be great. So you guys, I like to think in my head, you have a strong structure in place. These are things to continue to improve macro enterprises to become excellent, right? And excellence, it is, what's the word I'm looking for? Excellence is relative. It's always changing, right? You're always learning how to be better, how to do things better. So let's dive into our findings. So we find that the lack of technology, cohesive and coherent training practices, and the lack of orientation can be attributed to the carburetor manufacturing issue, which was one of the top issues that everyone's been complaining about. So again, my fast fact tip is that ambiguity can be problematic on so many different fronts, right? So if I tell someone, I want you to cut the watermelon, if I have a watermelon in front of me, that's my snack for today. But if I tell them I want you to cut the watermelon, but I don't ever tell them my expectations of how I want it done, it leaves so much room for interpretation, right? And if you're telling 125 people, because your organization has 125 employees at one location, how to do something, but you're not giving them specific instructions on how you want it done. I want you to cube it into 1/4 inch pieces, or I want you to calibrate the screws and the carburetors at this degree or whatever the case may be, it leaves so much room for interpretation. And again, that is one of the major problems. So I think the biggest thing is drilling down cohesive training practices for every area that you feel is problematic. So if it's teaching them how to calibrate the screws, right? If it's teaching them that every client that you serve has a different qualification of carburetor and the standard at which they should be built, you have to teach them those things, and you have to be specific and you have to be detailed if you want to get a detailed result from a product. So again, that's why I say ambiguity can be problematic. So we have to do the heavy lift of fleshing things out. Also, we have to address the issue that there's a one orientation day and then you have workers jumping on the floor. That's highly problematic. I feel that, although they are shadowing, and don't get me wrong, shadowing is an important component, I feel that that orientation needs to be at least 1 week to 2 weeks, because there's so much information, so much stimuli that's coming in as they're learning and processing. You don't want them to be overwhelmed. And what's the likelihood of you remembering everything that you learned in one day? Highly unlikely, right? And then with the shadowing day, great component. Love the shadow day, but that has to be in conjunction with something else, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, in regard to the checklist that you have on the floor, you have it in as a blank piece of paper, and people walk through. This is the first step. This is the second step. Maybe creating that out into a graphic organizer would be extremely beneficial. Into a poster-like visual would be super helpful, because they can walk through the steps visually, but it's also giving them a visual of what they're expected to do, right? And then they can follow the checklist along with the guides. And then we'll talk about a couple more new efforts in just a second. So let's talk new measurements. We have to get a grip on what it is that we want to measure, right? You want to improve quality, but it requires us to measure, right? Measurement determines effectiveness. It's important for us to use appropriate measurements to determine the organizational health and success. I can't stress this enough. It's super important to use measurement, because measurements tell the story and they aid in telling the story. So let's talk through measurements. So again, what we want to do for our measurements, we want to assess areas of improvement, right? And we've talked a little bit about this, but how to correctly calibrate the bolt drivers, how to check the bolt drivers' torque prior to using them, bolt tightening specifications, and then you also want to hold space. These are areas of improvement. You want to hold space for feedback from new and current employees. I always like to say, your employees are on the front line. They are the heart and the hands of the organization. No one knows better about what policies and how things are playing out. We sit behind the desk and write the policies, but people on the front lines, they understand how those policies work and they can help you tweak, right? So you want to hold space for new and current employees to be able to give their feedback to continually improve the process and continue to see the results that you're looking for. Also, I suggested the creation of a training university, right? I'm so pro any company, especially MacroEnterprises, after reviewing the reading comprehension scores, the mathematics comprehension scores, the writing scores. Is super important for your organization to be a learning organization. Also offering courses year round, right? With the in-person component, and also having virtual flexibility. And when I say virtual flexibility, I mean a hybrid offering. So some of the courses, they will be taught in a classroom setting virtually, and they will go through it as a cohort. And then also they will have a skills assessment exam to follow up to see if they've mastered, right? Because again, we're measuring success efforts. We want to see, have they mastered how to correctly calibrate that bolt driver? And then also, after you finish with your skills assessment exam, so they've basically gone through a virtual course through the local community college. There is an exam online that will be proctored, right? Those scores will be maintained on file. And then there's also an in-person practicum that flows nicely with your standard operating procedure of a shadow day. But at this point in time, they will be actually working hands-on to show that they've mastered the skill set, right? So these are just areas that we will measure and keep an eye out on. So let's talk about data. Data tells a story, so let's make that story good, right? Data, it makes me think of the saying, numbers don't lie, because they genuinely do not lie. Whether we like what the numbers say or not, there's always room for improvement, but you don't know if you're not